That's loud. We're going to start this morning. After our last class, we went through this part of Genesis, and I went to go put it online, and I forgot to start the video camera, and the soundtrack is horrible. And I was going to redo it, but it was Christmas time. I never did get it done. I'm trying to move over to a different laptop, because I think the problems with our noise is in this one. But that's easier said than done, because I also use it Sunday morning, so they got different settings, and I had a little difficulty with crossovers, so I'm going to try a couple other things. So what I'm going to do this morning is I'm going to go basically to the outline that I'm sort of using in the background, where I really want to kind of fall out in Don Advin's Life with God course. And I just want to kind of review kind of where we're at, and then I'm going to pick up today with Genesis chapter 21. And if there's a little repeat in that, I'm sorry, but I just got to kind of find a way to pick this up and go on with it.
Is it 21 or 12?
The what?
21 or 12?
This is
21.
21.
21, okay.
Yeah, 21.
Oh,
Did I leave off at 12? No, I was
I
beyond.
was just looking up there and I saw 12. And I
Oh no, I'm going to this is just kind of a summary
Okay.
that I want to do this morning.
Okay.
This whole lesson is the covenant with Abraham, the patriarchs, and the promise of God through Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. And we're going to kind of go in that direction this morning. And the things I just want to point out. In Genesis 12, the call of Abraham is sheer grace. Abraham did nothing to deserve it. It's just the grace of God saying, I choose you, Abraham. Go to this country where I tell you to go, and I will bless you. And Abraham did. Not that it was easy, but he did. Because he believed what God said, and that, as the writer to the Hebrews said, counted to him as righteousness. So sheer grace. Abraham was a heathen who worshipped idols when God called him. Joshua 24, verse 2 kind of makes that clear. God made 4 basic promises to Abraham. First, if you go, you'll have a land of your own. Multitudes of offspring. And last time we looked at how that came about, it was through his son Isaac. Remember, Abraham and Sarai were barren until Sarah was like 90. Okay, just imagine that. That's almost my mother-in-law's age, my mom's age, and to be barren that long. And then Isaac came. But remember, Abraham and Sarah weren't very patient waiting for God, and they manipulated that, right? Sarah said, take my maid, Hagar, have a child with her, and she had Ishmael. Okay, but that didn't work right either, because then, Hagar put that over on Sarah. I have your husband's son, you don't have one. And that didn't go well, as we're going to see in just a moment. So Abraham had Ishmael, and he had Isaac. Okay, God also promised that Abraham would be a blessing to the nations, and that God would make his name great. So then we looked at the parity covenant. Remember when God took the cow, literally split it down the spine, lays it down between smoking fire pots, and literally walks between it with Abraham. That's how they did their covenant. It kind of, may this be to me like this cow, if I so much as break this promise. God takes the initiative in making the covenant. It is sheer grace. Again, the definition for grace, God's undeserved love in Christ Jesus. Abraham does nothing but hear and believe. Abraham does believe, and God reckons that as righteousness. God swears to his covenant with Abraham by passing through the halves of the animals. The point of the ceremony is absolute fidelity by God to his promise. And this would be a lord to a vassal covenant. God being the Lord, Abraham, you're the vassal. There's no condition on this on your part. I'm just going to do this for you. Abraham and Sarah try alternate routes several times to help the promise along. God will not allow man to interfere. And I want to make a couple of comments on those points, because in our own lives, God comes to us with his covenant, doesn't he? He says, I choose you. That's a selection by grace, where some churches may say, well, God selected you because you did something different than others. No. God's selection is always by grace, and yet we as God's people, how many times don't we try to manipulate God and his promises? If life doesn't go quite the way we want, it's very easy for us to step in and try to adjust and manipulate things to our own liking. That's just part of our sinful nature, isn't it? And sometimes it's really easy. We go to God in prayer, sometimes asking for something, and waiting for God to do it. Sometimes it's not quite in reach, but if it ever does come in reach, sometimes we risk even our livelihood or our well-being sometimes to achieve what we want. And that can apply to any aspect of life. In the long run, though, God will not allow man to interfere. God is in control, no matter what, which is something that we need to remember. Today's a happy, sad day in our country. Half of our country is celebrating like crazy, and the other half is, thinking the end is near. And, depending upon which end of the political spectrum you are, it's either, in our country now, it's either here or it's here. There's not a whole lot of in-between. And wherever you are, we always have to remember God is still in control, and he remembers his people. His promises never change. And the other thing we always have to remember, salvation comes from the Lord, not any human institution, not any manipulating of man. And for us, we always have to remember the world is not our place. Like Abraham, we are sojourning through a land that is not our own. God promises a land of our own, but that comes when the Lord comes on the last day and takes us to heaven. So we always have to kind of put that in perspective no matter where we're at in life. So let's take a look now. I'm going to switch. I got to switch here. Let's see. That's all right. I don't have my, what's wrong here? Hang on. There it is. All right. Let me switch. No, that's the same thing, isn't it? Well, I'm having this again. Maybe this will. Maybe I need to have this on. There we go, finally. Okay. Sorry about that. All right, let's take a look at Genesis 21. I put it up here on the screen. The Lord visited Sarah as he had said, And the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised. And Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham called the name of the son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore him, Isaac. In the Hebrew it sounds like Yishkak. Okay, that's the Hebrew pronunciation of it. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac. Remember, that's the sign of the covenant, right? Kind of like baptism is for us. He circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Just listening to that makes me tired. You know, it's just hard to imagine, you know, the little bit we go up and visit Mike and Nicole, you know, watching the grandchildren grow up as you do, you know, as grandparents, how much energy that takes on our part. Bonnie, you do that a whole lot more often than the rest of us, right? And 100 years old.
Gotta stay young.
Yeah, what?
Stay on top of it.
Yeah, you do. 100 years old. So that just kind of puts that into perspective. And Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. Everyone here who hears will laugh over me. And she said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne to him a son in his old age. And those are just pure words of joy on Sarah's part. You know, and the ancient adage was, if you didn't have children, often that was thought to be because the gods were against you because you were not a good person. Okay? And so having a child kind of vindicates that thought. And so verse 8, God protects Hagar and Ishmael, and the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. But Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, laughing. So she said to Abraham, cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not be heir with my son Isaac. And the thing was very displeasing to Abraham on account of his son. But God said to Abraham, be not displeased because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to do, do as she tells you, for through Isaac shall your offspring be named. Notice again how God is not deterred from his original course, even though Sarah and Abraham tried to manipulate things. I will make a great nation of the son of the slave woman also, because he is your offspring. And thus begins a problem that still goes on in that ancient part of the world today. Israel versus Ishmael. And again, it goes back, if only Abraham had believed God, trusted in him, and waited for him, that would have never happened. All the Ishmaelites and the heathen nations that rose up from that would not have been. Once again, we sometimes think we can sin and get away with it, but it so often has just lasting consequences down through the generations. So again, I think this is God's way of saying, be careful. So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder along with the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. Before class, I pulled up some pictures. I don't know if you can see that real well. That's Beersheba. And this is the wilderness of Beersheba. That's kind of what it looks like. Okay? Imagine sending your son and somebody out into that kind of wild wilderness. And that's what it looks like in that part of the land. Okay? In other directions around Beersheba, you know, you can see that it's, with some work, you can still grow crops in it, but this is more what it's like. This is more what it's like down there. If you want to see it on a map, Beersheba is right here. I don't know if I can make that map big or not. Yeah, here you can see it, Beersheba. So Hebron, Beersheba, and this is getting down toward, you know, toward Egypt. So, all right, let me go back to this. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the child under one of the bushes. Then she went and sat down opposite him in a good way off, about a distance of a bow shot. For she said, "Let me not look on the death of the child." And so you can see they're struggling out there. You can see why when you look at that desert. And as she sat opposite him, she lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the boy, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Lift up the boy and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make him into a great nation." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. And God was with the boy, and he grew up. He lived in the wilderness and became an expert with the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. And so again, we see God being gracious, as so often he is, but sometimes not without going through difficult times. Okay, so when difficult times come along, that doesn't mean God isn't gracious. That doesn't mean God cares. But what did Hagar do? She lifted up her eyes to the Lord. She communicated with him in prayer. And notice what it says: God opened her eyes. She could see the well, and there was water for her child and for her. And God created a way for them to grow up and continue living on in that place. And that's just how God is. So we get to the treaty with Abimelech, which I'm not really going to get into. Again, they made a covenant in Beersheba. Abraham took some sheep and oxen, gave them to Abimelech, and the two men made a covenant over the land. So Abraham sojourned many days there in that land. Notice it's called here the land of the Philistines. And if you go back to the map, again, right here, this whole area right in here, you can see it, the land of the Philistines, right here. Beersheba is right on the edge of that, as is Hebron, which goes from Egypt up to here. And, what's that called now in Israel, modern-day Israel?
Not the Western Wall part, but no.
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 What?
I said Palestine, that's not right.
Let me, modern Israel.
Google's a good thing.
What?
Google's a good thing.
You know, I kind of like this I kind of like this. Gaza, the Gaza Strip. Yeah, and that's where all the rockets and missiles are coming from. As a matter of fact, the day we were going over to Israel, they were shooting rockets here from Gaza up here along the Western Bank, and some of the people on our tour almost decided not to go that morning. And our experience was, go. They'll keep you in the safe places, and they did. And even though they were firing missiles while we were over there, they're rudimentary at most, and we just really had no idea what was going on. It felt safe like it always does there. So anyway, that's kind of modern day times for that. All right, let's go to Genesis 22. This is kind of an amazing sequence here in the Bible, the sacrifice of Isaac. God gives Abraham and Isaac a single son, and then God tests Abraham. And after these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, "Abraham," and he said, "Here I am." He says, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you." Going, God, what is going on? Right? Because what does this put in jeopardy?
Everything.
Everything. Because God said, through this promised son, I will make you into a great nation. How is that going to happen if Abraham has to sacrifice Isaac on an altar on a mountain that God determines? Plus, why would God want a sacrifice like that? You know? So he has a choice here, right? Either he, once again, takes God at his word and does what God says, or he steps back and manipulates it once again, like he and Sarah had tried to do so often in the past. He still had Hagar, but God said, God in the last chapter said, no, this offspring won't come through Hagar, even though he's going to be made into a great nation. This is coming through Isaac, and that's one of those points in life where what God wants makes absolutely zero sense to our way of thinking, but not God's way of thinking. So Abraham rose up early in the morning. He didn't wait, did he? You know, he had this word from the Lord. He acted on it right away, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him and his son Isaac. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering, and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. And Abraham said to his young men, "Stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you." Now, take a close look at that sentence. What does that sentence say? I and the boy will go over there and worship and then come again to you. We will come again to you. What's Abraham thinking here? The writer to the Hebrews tells us, Abraham so believed the promise that he was willing to sacrifice Isaac, believing that God would raise him from the dead because of that promise. That's faith. You know, that is faith. I couldn't imagine having to do that to one of my sons.
But there's so much. There's also so much.
What, Bonnie?
There's so much in this, like it said, on the 3rd day they finally reached the place. It's all prophetic according to...
Oh yeah, you're beginning to hear it, right?
Yeah.
Listen to this. I was going to come back to that, but since you brought it up. Take your son, your only son, whom you love, right? What did Jesus say about Jesus at his baptism? This is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased to sacrifice. Eudokeo there means to sacrifice. It doesn't really translate that way, but it's there in the Greek.
It's
Okay?
funny. I read Genesis many times,
Yeah,
and I don't comprehend exactly everything I read.
right.
And this is the first time I realized.
Yeah,
And I knew Isaac and Jesus married each other
yeah,
in 2,000 years difference, but
Yeah.
they married each other.
yeah,
But I never thought, this is the first time I really
yeah.
got that deep.
Yeah. See, the word, when you say mirroring each other, we call that typology, where something in the past is a type, mirrors the Lord who is to come. Okay, and this is so close. And you know where they went to do the sacrifice? They're down here near Beersheba, right? Hebron, down in this area. And they go all the way up here to Jerusalem. And they really believe that where Isaac was to be sacrificed is the place, the hill, the mount on which they eventually built the temple. Okay? Where they did the sacrificing later on. Okay? So that's just, you know, the connection here is so strong that way. So let's look what happened. I and the boy will go over there in their worship, and we can say, we will come back to you. Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac, his son, and he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So they went, both of them, together. Notice who's carrying the wood. Isaac's carrying the wood on which he is supposedly going to be burned. Okay? And Isaac said to his father Abraham, my father, he said, here I am. my son," he said, "behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering?" Abraham said, "God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son." So they went both of them together. Notice Abraham's faith here. God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. You know, this is quite the language. When they came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar. I mean, literally bound his son. Isaac had to wonder what in the world is going on to see his father act in such an uncharacteristic way. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham." And he said, "Here I am." He said, "Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son from me." Now let's get your son, your only son from me. Okay? And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the name of that place, "The Lord will provide," as it is said to this day, "on the mount of the Lord it shall be provided." So there it is. God provided the sacrifice. So Isaac is spared. Who wasn't spared? Jesus. You know, he was the ultimate sacrifice. But again, in reading this whole thing about Isaac sacrificing his son, we get direct insight into the Trinity, in how God the Father himself must have felt to sacrifice his son. And there was no ram, but there was a resurrection. Okay? You just see humanly, we so see the difficulty in this for Abraham and for Isaac. I often wondered what the conversation was like between them coming back. You know, what did they say about it? What did Abraham tell Isaac? Verse 15, "And the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, 'By myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies, and your offspring shall be all the nations of the earth. And in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice.' So Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham lived in Beersheba." Who's the voice here speaking to Abraham? "And the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us." The actual voice is the one who, when he takes on human flesh, will be the sacrifice. Okay? Like he says, only God can provide that sacrifice, right? Only God. Now after these things, it was told to Abraham, "Behold, Milcah also has borne children to your brother Nahor. Uz his firstborn, Buz his brother, Kemuel, the father of Aram, Chesed, Hazo, Fildash, Jidlap, and Bethuel." Wow, we should name some of our children these names, right? Bethuel fathered Rebekah. Okay, so now we're getting the connection for Isaac, right? Okay, and that's what's important here. Bethuel fathered Rebekah. These 8 Milcah bore to Nahor, Abraham's brother. Moreover, his concubine, whose name was Remuah, bore Taba, Gaham, Tahash, and Maacah. And I think it's interesting there, you know, he has a concubine. You know, not really in God's plan, is it? So that's chapter
Is
20.
that Abraham that had the concubine or his brother?
His brother.
Oh, his brother.
Yeah, his brother. Okay, let's go to the next chapter. 23. Sarah lived 127 years. So Isaac would have been, she was 90 when he was born. So, she had 37 years of motherhood. Which I think at this time in life, this long of a life is pretty amazing. Okay? These were the years of the life of Sarah, and Sarah died at Kiriath. Why do they have to hyphenate that there? Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. Again, Hebron right here. They lived in Beersheba. Here's Hebron. It's kind of the sense that Abraham settled down with Isaac. You kind of get that? That he wasn't wandering up and down the whole of the land anymore. But this is great land here for sheep herding.
Well, isn't that where Ishmael's mom was at first?
Yeah,
Don't you
she
find
settled
that
in
good, by the way?
Beersheba.
Yeah, I mean, that's where they were.
Yeah, so she's nearby.
Well, yeah, but I figured she probably went on to Egypt because she got the wife.
Oh, that's possible. That's
Yeah, I just
possible.
thought it was interesting that Abraham settled in the place where Hagar and Ishmael were.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Basically, they nomaded that land. They went with his shepherds went where the grass was there. But Abraham settles, and probably Abraham, if Hagar and Ishmael are around or near there, because it said Ishmael hunted in those hills, right? That also gave Abraham a chance to be with his other son. Just because you send them away doesn't mean he doesn't necessarily have to be without a connection to him. But the Bible just doesn't say. You just kind of wonder. So, verse 3, and Abraham went to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. But Abraham rose up from before his dead and said to the Hittites, I am a sojourner and a foreigner among you. Give me property among you for a burying place, that I may bury my dead out of my sight. And the Hittites answered Abraham, Hear us, my lord, you are a prince of God among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our tombs. None of us will withhold from you his tomb or hinder you from burying your dead. Abraham rose and bowed to the Hittites, the people of the land, and he said to them, If you are willing that I should bury my dead out of my sight, hear me, entreat for me Ephron, son of Zohar, that he may give me the cave of Machpelah, which he owns. It is at the end of his field. For the full price, let him give it to me in your presence as property for burying a place. Now, what did God promise Abraham? You and your offspring will possess the land. Does Abraham own any of it? No, but he is moving through it, right? But he doesn't even have a place to bury his wife. Okay, that's how little of it he owns. And you look at this and say, was God really faithful to his promise? And now the piece that he wants to get, this little piece, he's going to buy. He doesn't want it to be a gift from them, but he wants to buy. Notice, though, that the Hittites recognize him as a prince, right? So that's almost a place of royalty in their sight, okay? Because God has made him so great. There might be a little struggle here that he has to buy a piece of the land, but remember, sometimes God's promises are realized from afar off. I'm giving this to you, Abraham, and to your offspring, okay? And the gift wasn't coming out necessarily as a deed to the land, but to the country, to a people that would eventually be. God's promise is much bigger than just deed to a land that you can keep during your lifetime. Okay, it's kind of like this. I was joked for a lot of years that, you know, I pray to God for a Lamborghini and he never gives me one. You know my story, right? And then Tamara, Kevin, that one day came up with not a Lamborghini, but a Ferrari, you know, a $400,000 Ferrari. And I got to drive it for an afternoon. And that's just an experience of a lifetime. It's just like, wow. But you know, for that whole afternoon, the car did not belong to me, but that afternoon it did. Because I got to drive it, and everyone driving and passing me, looking at it, and, you know, doing, yay, you know, those kind of things as you go by. You know, they had no clue. You know, I just put on my hat, top was down, and just drove like I owned it. $27 a lug nut car. You know, and that's how Abraham owned this land. Okay? He had possession of it, but it wasn't his. He didn't have the deed to it. But nonetheless, he had possession of it, and God made him great in that land, so much so that they recognized him as a prince. Now, Ephron was sitting among the Hittites, and Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham in the hearing of the Hittites, of all who went in the gate, in at the gate of his city. No, my Lord, hear me. I give you the field, and I give you the cave that is in it. In the sight of the sons of my people, I give it to you. Bury your dead. And Abraham bowed down before the people of the land, and he said to Ephron in the hearing of the people of the land, but if you will hear me, I give the price of my field, accept it from me, that I may bury my dead there. Ephron answered Abraham, my Lord, listen to me, a piece of land worth 400 shekels of silver. What is that between you and me? Bury your dead. Abraham listened to Ephron, and Abraham weighed out for Ephron the silver that he had named in the hearing of the Hittites, 400 shekels of silver, according to the weights current among the merchants. So the field of Ephron in Machpelah, which was to the east of Mamre, the field with the cave that was in it, and all the trees that were in the field, throughout its whole area, was made over to Abraham as a possession in the presence of the Hittites. A legal contract, right? Before all who went in at the gate of the city. After this, Abraham buried Sarah his wife in the cave of the field of Machpelah, east of Mamre, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. The field and the cave that is in it were made over to Abraham as property for a burying place for the Hittites. I should have actually looked up a picture of that. Let me see. I'm going to look real quick. I'm just curious. A-B-R-A-J. Sure. Yeah, here it is. They made a... they do what they always do in the Holy Land. They built a church over it. Sure enough. I would say that's a shame because I'd like to see it preserved like it was. You know, they have the birthplace of Jesus, you know, pretty much down to the place, and it looks, you know, it's just got the slab over it, nothing like the original big church over it. That's okay. It forces us to take it out of the Word where we should be anyway. Now Abraham was old, well advanced in years, chapter 24. And the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things, and Abraham said to his servant, the oldest of his household, who had charge of all he had, put your hand under my thigh, that I may make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I dwell. What's the danger in that? Idolatry and heathenism. Okay? The best thing to do is to turn to your own family in this case. So, yeah, go ahead, Bonnie.
Would you remind me what the purpose of the hand under the thigh? There's supposed to be isn't there a meaning behind that?
About the what?
The hand under your thigh? I thought we had talked about that before, but I can't remember.
You might have talked about that in another Bible class.
I just wondered, I didn't. know what the significance was of putting your hand under the thighs.
Okay, I'm going to do what I always do.
Yeah, it's a promise, but I thought it was a significant one, I don't know.
Abraham,
That's definitely a good answer.
that image is off. Okay, here it is. In our culture, taking an oath usually involves raising the right hand or placing a hand over the heart or on a Bible. In ancient Hebrew culture, we find something a little different. This section describes an odd practice that involved Abraham's servant swearing to obey his master's command to find a wife for Isaac. So the servant put his hand under the thigh of Abraham, his master, and swore to him concerning this matter. Jacob makes his son Joseph swear to bury him in Canaan, not Egypt. The same ritual is observed. Joseph is required to put his hand under Jacob's thigh and makes the promise. It seems strange to us, but placing one's hand under someone else's thigh had symbolic purposes. The thigh was considered the source of posterity in the ancient world, or more properly, the loins or the testicles. The phrase under the thigh could be a euphemism for on the loins. There are two reasons why someone would take an oath in this manner. Abraham had been promised a seed by God, and this is the covenant blessing that was passed on to his son and grandson. And Abraham made his trusted servant swear on the seed of Abraham that he would find a wife for Isaac. So you know what he grabbed a hold of now. Okay? And, to carry this in, when God made the parity covenant, they also hand on the thigh, okay, so to speak. So I guess that's just a nice English way of saying something we probably did. So that's here for Got Questions on godquestions.org. Good enough for me.
Interesting.
I kind of it's kind of nice having Google here. When you ask a question, I can look it up, pop it up on the screen. I don't know, did that show up okay when I read that? That's kind of small,
I know.
but I read it to you, so.
That's okay.
Anyway,
Interesting, okay.
that's a good question,
Just
Bonnie.
curious, I thought it had some type of significance, but I didn't know, I couldn't remember.
Well, I'm glad you asked that because I knew about handling the testicles during the parity covenant, but I never really connected it to that until you asked the question. So, good question. I just thought I'd put their hand right here or something.
Yeah, right. Well, that's what we would call the thigh.
But it makes sense because it keeps talking about seed. In the Greek, because I know the Greek so much better than the Hebrew, in the Greek, the word for seed is sperma. Okay? Okay, that's the Greek word for seed. So again, that kind of connects to this. Through your seed, you will produce this. So, and this also has to do with the seed of Abraham. So, Abraham said to them, where was I?
I'm sorry,
Oh,
verse 4.
Verse 4, but I will go to my country and to my kindred and take a wife for my son Isaac. The servant said to him, perhaps the woman may not be willing to follow me to this land. Must I then take your son back to the land from which you came? Abraham said to him, see to it that you do not take my son back there. The Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from the land of my kindred, who spoke to me and swore to me, to your offspring I will give this land. He will send his angels before you, and you shall take a wife for my son from there. But if the woman is not willing to follow you, then you will be free from your oath, from this oath of mine, and you must not take my son back there. So the servant put his hand underneath the thigh of Abraham, his master, and swore to him concerning this matter. Then the servant took 10 of his master's camels and departed, taking all sorts of choice gifts from his master. And he arose and went to Mesopotamia, to the city of Nahor. This is getting up into southern Turkey, okay, northern Iraq. So it's up the Fertile Crescent because Abraham had come from there originally. And
Which Nahor's is.
the what?
Nahor's a city, but it's also this, it was brother, Nahor,
Yeah.
Abraham's brother.
Yeah.
So it must have been his, kind of named a city after him? or
Probably.
something?
And,
Okay.
and they call it a city, but it's a town.
Yeah,
I think, didn't it say, wasn't in our text where where James and John came from, Peter, James, and John, Bethsaida, the city of Bethsaida, it's really the town of Bethsaida. It's not a city. Capernaum, the city of Capernaum, but you walk into the city today, it's called the town of Capernaum. And it's not real big. Capernaum itself probably takes up our church property, the ballpark, and just maybe this little 4-block area is all the bigger Capernaum is.
You know what, we were really surprised about how small Jericho is.
I haven't been to Jericho.
Oh my,
Oh.
it's very small, they could easily walk around it 7 times.
Oh, the old ancient Jericho. Did you see ancient Jericho? We
Well,
did
saw the
not.
wall, it's supposed to be the wall around it, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was looking for it. I never saw it because
Well, we had that trip to Jordan.
you had a different trip than ours. They just drove us in, fed us, let us see the Mount of Temptation, and then they took us to a place to buy Jericho glass,
So,
which I would have rather skipped the glass
It's supposed to be
place.
the actual Jericho is what they told us.
Yeah.
Actual Jericho.
Yeah. So is it north or south? Where is it? Did you, are you able to?
I can't really recall, but
Yeah,
it was.
again, we were taken to a restaurant.
Oh, yeah.
Antique shop.
And you would look over
We
there.
walked up to the top and there was a little observation territory.
Okay.
Across from that was where they were excavating a wall.
All right, all right.
And it's supposed to be the real thing, but but it was very interesting because, we
It's
have
sold a lot
cities,
of lunches.
and it was just very small comparatively speaking.
Yeah.
To what you were describing.
Yeah, yeah.
Because, you wondered how they could walk around the city center.
Yeah, they weren't that
Well, you see
big.
it, then you could see how that could happen. you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, they just weren't that big.
Yeah.
So let me finish this whole thing with I want to say Rachel, with Rebekah. So, 11, thank you. And he made the camel kneel down outside the city by the well of water at the time of evening, the time when women go out to draw water. He said, O Lord, my God, my master Abraham, please grant me success today and show steadfast love to my master Abraham. Behold, I am standing by the spring of water, and the daughters of the men of the city are coming out to draw water. Let the young woman to whom I shall say, please let down your jar that I may drink, and all who say drink, and I will water your camels, let her be the one whom you have appointed for your servant Isaac. By this I shall know you have shown steadfast love to my master. Again, where did people meet strangers? At the well. That's the common place of greeting. And before he'd finished speaking, notice how quickly this takes place. Behold, Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, Abraham's brother, came out with her water jar on her shoulder. The young woman was very attractive in appearance, a maiden whom no man had known. She went down to the spring and filled her jar and came up. And the servant ran to meet her and said, please give me a little water to drink from your jar. She said, drink, my lord. And she quickly let down her jar upon her head and gave him a drink. When she had finished giving him a drink, she said, I will draw water for your camels also, until they have finished drinking. So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough and ran again to the well to draw water, and she drew for all his camels. And the man gazed at her in silence to learn whether the Lord had prospered his journey or not. When the camels had finished drinking, the man took the gold ring weighing a half a shekel, and the two bracelets for her arms weighing 10 gold shekels, and said, please tell me whose daughter you are. Is the room in your father's house for us to spend the night?" She said to him, "I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor." She added, "I have plenty of both straw and fodder and room to spend the night." The man bowed his head and worshipped the Lord and said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his steadfast love and faithfulness toward my master. As for me, the Lord has led me in the way to the house of my master's kinsman." The young woman ran and told her mother's household about all these things. Rebekah's brother, whose name was Laban, ran out toward the man to the spring. As soon as he saw the ring and the bracelets on his sister's arms and heard the word of Rebekah's sister, "Thus the man spoke to me," he went to the man, and behold, he was standing by the camels at the spring. He said, "Come in, O blessed of the Lord. Why do you stand outside? For I have prepared the house and a place for the camels." So the man came to the house and unharnessed the camels and gave straw and fodder to the camels, and there was water to wash his feet and the feet of the men who were with him. Then food was set before him to eat, but he said, "I will not eat until I have said what I have to say." He said, "Speak on." He said, "I am Abraham's servant. The Lord has greatly blessed my master, and he has become great. He has given him flocks and herds, silver and gold, male servants and female servants, camels and donkeys. And Sarah, my master's wife, bore a son to my master when she was old, and said to him, 'He has given all that he has.' My master made me swear, saying, 'You shall not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, in whose land I dwell, but you shall go to my father's house and to my clan, and take a wife for my son.' I said to my master, 'Perhaps the woman will not follow me.' But he said to me, 'The Lord, before whom I have walked, will send his angel with you and prosper your way. You shall take a wife for my son from my clan and from my father's house. Then you will be free from my oath when you come to my clan. And if they will not give her to you, you will be free from my oath.'" And he goes on. He goes on telling the rest of the story that we just read. And verse 50, "Then Laban and Bethuel answered and said, 'The thing has come from the Lord. We cannot speak to you bad or good. Behold, Rebekah is before you. Take her and go. Let her be to the wife of your master's son, as the Lord has spoken.'" And there it was. They asked Rebekah, "Will you go with this man?" She said, "I will go," in verse 57. So they sent away Rebekah, their sister, and her nurse, and Abraham's servant, and all his men. And they blessed Rebekah and said to her, "Our sister, may you become thousands of 10,000s, and may your offspring possess the gates of those who hate him." And then Rebekah left with him, and Isaac returned from Beer-leth-roy and was dwelling in the Negev. And Isaac went out to meditate in the field toward evening. He lifted up his eyes and saw, behold, there was camels coming, and Rebekah lifted up her eyes, and when she saw Isaac, she dismounted from the camel and said to the servant, "Who is this man walking in the field to meet us?" The servant said, "It is my master." So she took her veil and covered herself, and the servant told Isaac all the things he had done. Then Isaac brought her into the tent of Sarah, his mother, and took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. So Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. There it is. God provided. I'm going to close with prayer, then I'm going to deal with questions. I'm doing that because if I let this camera go too long, I don't get a smooth track. It starts a new file, and then I have to jury-rig those tracks. So let's close with prayer. Lord God, Heavenly Father, in our lessons today, we see over and over and over again how you provide. When the time is right, you bless those who trust in you. Help us to remember the faithfulness to your promises and be patient in waiting for you to provide for us the things we need in body and life. Guide us through this life, dear Lord, until you take us home to be with you, to dwell with you forever in heaven. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.